Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Reka, for your introductory comments and for your introduction of me. The only thing I'm wondering is why Matt Harmon and my podcasts have not reached 6 continents yet. So you can bet that we'll be working on that as the spring semester continues. But in all seriousness, thank you for your introduction and for reciting that prodigious amount of work that's happening here at Monmouth. I also, more importantly, though, Reka, I want to thank you in the company of our colleagues. I want to thank you for the incredible job that you're doing as our interim senior vice president and provost during a really challenging time. If we were all gathered together, I'm sure that we would be giving you the hearty applause that you deserve. So thank you. Let me just quickly also thank my colleague, Michael Corsi, for setting up this technology, and whomever else collaborated with Michael. I thank you for setting up this remote virtual event to allow me to deliver some remarks at the Spring Convocation 2021. It never seems like a perfect time. I recognize that. Here it is around noon on Friday, the first week of classes. I apologize in advance to anyone who wanted to join but could not, especially if you are tied up in classes. First things first here at this university. So again, my apologies. I'll try to make, if possible, a recording available to interested parties at some later point. But my thanks to all of you for joining. This will be a lot more informal than normal. I try to deliver these convocation addresses on a semi-annual basis. So this will be somewhere between the formal convocation and one of my bi-weekly open calls with all of you. So my thanks. As we begin to think about the next semester here at Monmouth, and we offer the spring convocation, which is a ritual that I've done ever since I've been a university president. At this time, we find ourselves in a really troubling context. I mean, you all know as well or better than I the challenges that our country faces right now. The pandemic, for example, continues. When this started back in March, I don't think any of us, or let me speak for myself, I certainly did not think that we would continue to be managing this pandemic 1 year later. But we are, and that is continuing to create health challenges, physical health challenges, and mental health challenges, and other kind of pain across our country. That's the first challenge. The second is, of course, that our country remains as deeply divided as virtually anyone can remember. It started way back during the election in November, continued all the way through the holidays and into the new year. And just when we thought we could turn the page on the new year, the assault on our Capitol on January 6th. The divisions in our country, some people are saying, have not been this deep since the Civil War. So there are people all over our country who are hurting right now for one reason or another. And it's in that context that we find ourselves reconvening for the spring semester here at Monmouth. The challenges can seem overwhelming. They're exhausting in so many respects. But I continue to believe that we have to do our small part in our small corner of the world to relieve that pain. We want to make sure that we're doing whatever we can as a university community to create that more just and equitable, diverse, and inclusive community. I was reminded just this week by Dr. Ibram Kendi. I was so proud that Dr. Zanetta Rego Kraft was able to bring him to the Monmouth University community. Time magazine had him as one of the top 100 most influential people in the country last year, and we had him here at Monmouth. And he reminded us of a very important point, which is we can claim not to be racist, but we must adopt a decidedly anti-racist viewpoint. And I think that's something I've learned over the last number of years, the distinction between those two things. And I was, again, so pleased to be able to have him here at Monmouth. So in order to deliver some remarks here at the beginning of the semester, I'd like to do it in three parts. One, briefly, I'd like to talk about where we are right now at the university, and in particular, dealing with the pandemic. Number two, and for the majority of the time, I want to talk about our strategic plan. And number three, I want to give you some ideas about ways in which this semester we will be advancing that strategic plan, perhaps even before it is formally kicked off in July. So those 3 points I'd like to cover with you today. Let me begin, though, with John Masefield. Some of you may recall that I have used this before, so forgive me for going back to content again and again, but it just speaks to me so much, and I hope it does you as well. John Masefield was the poet laureate in Great Britain during the 20th century. And in 1946, now imagine our world in 1946, especially over in Great Britain. In 1946, he visited a university that was inaugurating a new president, one of the UK universities. And he said this about universities: there are few earthly things more splendid than a university. In these days of broken frontiers and collapsing values, when every future looks somewhat grim and the dams are down and the floods are making misery, when every ancient foothold has become something of a quagmire, wherever a university stands, it stands and shines. Wherever it exists, the free minds of men, urged on to full and fair inquiry, may still bring wisdom into human affairs. Well, as we begin to bring wisdom into human affairs, I'd like to amend his statement by saying the men and women of Monmouth start bringing wisdom into human affairs. Let me give you an update first on where we are. As I mentioned, and you all know, this is the first week of the spring semester. And I'm so proud and grateful to our faculty members who have once again, as Reka suggested, risen to the challenge to design coursework this spring that meets the needs of our students, whether they wanted to be 100% online or in person or in some hybrid fashion. The pandemic continues here on this campus as it does around the country and around the world. And we're going to need to make sure that we renew our focus on managing the pandemic. We need to keep our energy as high as possible in managing the pandemic. Like all of you, I desperately want to be on the other side of this public health crisis, but we're not there yet. And until we are, we owe it to our students and we owe it to each other to make sure that we keep focused on managing the pandemic day to day. As I mentioned, there'll be a mix of online programming offered to our students this spring semester. Over the past week or so, we've welcomed back to campus to live with us nearly 1,100 of our undergraduate students. The activities here on campus will again be high, Most of them will be, again, conducted virtually, but with one exception, and I've mentioned this before. This spring, we hope to offer to our students who are athletes opportunities to compete, both our varsity athletes and, if possible, our club and intramural athletes as the pandemic allows. This is going to create additional strain on our ability to manage the pandemic in the coming semester. But I'd like to repeat something I've been saying for weeks now. The only reason that we are trying to move heaven and earth to make these athletic competitions possible is because it's what our student athletes, their coaches, and their support staff want. It is not about the money. I have this mistaken impression that people think that we're chasing some money. It's going to cost us a lot more to offer athletic programs this spring to our student athletes than it will be to generate additional resources, especially when we'll have no fans at athletic events this spring, at least at this point anyway. But this is going to tax the system even more so this spring, maybe, than in the fall. And I know that all of us here at Monmouth are up to the challenge. As we welcome students back to campus, our testing regime kicks into full force. I think, as I've mentioned on previous open calls, we'll do a lot more batch testing this spring than we did in the fall. Of course, when you test more, you identify more cases. After weeks and weeks of having 0 cases, we're now back up into the 20s, managing individuals in isolation and in quarantine to make sure that we contain the spread of the virus as much as possible. All of the protocols are pretty much still in place from the fall to the spring. They're available on the COVID website in order, if you want to refresh your memory, but the simple things remain. Mask up at all times, back up, that is, stay 6 or more feet away from folks, and wash up. Keep your hands as clean as possible. And then you'll remember that I've added a fourth based on an epidemiologist sharing this with me in the fall. He said one of the most important things we can do is try hard not to touch our faces. So mask up, back up, wash up, and face off, maybe, I don't know. Some other way to remind yourself to try to limit the number of times that we take the germs off of things and put it into our bodies by touching our faces. We are, as I think you know, a closed pod. That means that when the vaccine is available, we will be able to vaccinate our community consistent with the prioritization that the state has in general. So we're ready to do that. The challenge is we don't have the vaccine. So we keep looking for opportunities when the state identifies how they're going to distribute the vaccine for ways in which we might make the case for that vaccine to find its way here to Monmouth. So we'll keep you updated on that, of course, as the semester continues. I want to pause just for a moment and thank so many people to thank, but 2 really, if I may, who have been managing day to day this pandemic. The chair of our crisis management team, Mary Ann Nagy, for her incredible dedication during this challenging time, and her director of health services, Kathy Maloney, who has conducted many of those thousands of tests that Reka mentioned. There's so many more, and I don't mean to omit anyone, but I do know that during this public health challenge, those 2 individuals have really risen to the challenge, and I want to thank them publicly for their service to Monmouth. Now let me turn to the future. Some of you have heard me talk a little bit about this concept that I'm about to share before. Ignatius of Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, and some of you know that I was educated by the Jesuits, way back in the 16th century, he had a belief about leadership. And he said that all leaders must simultaneously have one foot firmly planted on the ground and one foot raised in the air. That is, one foot firmly planted in the present, always with one foot raised to the future. And that's resonated with me as we've begun again our strategic planning efforts. A foot firmly planted in the ground is all about managing the pandemic day after day after day to make sure that we keep our community as healthy and as safe as possible. At the same time, we must be thinking about where can we go as a university as the pandemic, hopefully in 2021, winds down and then ends outright. So let me share with you, if I may, the latest thinking about our strategic plan. You'll remember that a year ago at last year's convocation, I rolled out the strategic plan, and I promised that we would be sharing this with members of the campus community for feedback in the coming weeks. Then the pandemic hit, and I pumped the brakes on the strategic planning process, if you will. As you know, it's been restarted here in the fall. The Strategic Planning Committee has met numerous times and has drafted what we'll call a final draft of a 5-year strategic plan. This is the culminating work of the committee working together, hosting open meetings, hosting that strategic plan-a-thon that you might recall from months ago, meeting with individual constituencies around the campus, assembling all of these ideas and putting them into what we believe is a fairly concise document that lays out a roadmap for the next 5 years. This plan is now making its way around the governance bodies, the faculty council, the staff council, the student government. There will be open meetings on this before hopefully bringing it to the board at the end of February. And this is what it says. And the idea behind this, if I may be personal, struck me, frankly, before I even became the president at Monmouth. When a search consultant reached out to me and said, you need to look at this private institution on the Jersey Shore, the first thing I did, pretty much the first thing I did, is I went to iPads and I looked to see the student profile here at Monmouth. And in particular, I was in search of the Pell Grant eligibility of our undergraduate students. To me, like so many in the industry, that is a measure around how accessible you make your educational experience. I was so pleased that it was in the 30s, that the number of students at the undergraduate level, I think at that time was about 32% were eligible for Pell Grants. And that was attractive to me, so much so that I continued with the process. I arrive here at Monmouth and I start looking at, this accessibility that we have and an interest that I could sense from the campus community to make ourselves even more accessible, especially as our recruiting demographics start diversifying and changing. At the same time, we have at this university continued a positive march up various rankings, in particular, US News and World Report. So I started putting the two together. Excellence, as measured by relatively strong rankings, and access, as measured by Pell Grants. And I started looking at who are the universities and colleges around the country that really and truly integrate excellence and access. Everybody talks about it. Okay, we know that. But how many can really prove that they are integrating excellence and access? We were already starting to do it. And as we studied it, and as we started talking through with the strategic planning committee, I think we became convinced that in a 5-year period, in 5 short years, we could become a bona fide national leader at integrating excellence and access as measured by those 2 metrics, rankings and Pell Grant eligibility. This is something that really speaks to the heart of who we are, I believe, as educators. We want to build the best possible university that we can build, and then make that as widely accessible to students as possible. But if we want to become a national leader at integrating excellence and access, we must become both more excellent, if you will, and more accessible. And this 5-year strategic plan is all about that, in my opinion. There are 6 themes that continue. There were 6 last year before the pandemic. As the team looked at it again, we're going to keep those 6. 6 themes or threads that are intertwining and interlocking, all around becoming both more excellent as an educational institution and more accessible. I just want to hit the 6 themes quickly. Incidentally, the details of this will be widely available. The full plan will be available for your review. Let me just hit the highlights. Theme 1, invest in academic excellence. If there's a strategic plan of an educational institution out there that doesn't first and foremost talk about investing in academic excellence, then I don't think it's worth much. So of course, we're going to begin with an investment in academic excellence. And there are a number of objectives. First, about reviewing our current suite of programs and finding ways to strengthen those. Then looking at additional programs that we might add that meet student interest and demand. We'll look at ways to enhance high impact learning. How do we advance and enhance the number of students who have study abroad experiences? What about growing the number of service learning opportunities? How about a more robust summer program? Even the possibility, I'm not saying we're going to do it, but the possibility of a winter session so that students who have those 3 or 4 weeks off over the winter break could take courses as well. All of that around academic programming and enhancing the academic offering. And then a final point under this theme about investment in our faculty. In particular, making scholarship and research opportunities more available for our faculty members so that they might stay on the leading edge of their respective fields, and how that might accrue to the benefit of the students that they teach. So theme 1 is about investing in academic excellence. Theme 2 is about, of course, enhancing the student experience. We must continue, if we are going to be seen as a high quality institution, we must continue to grow our retention and our graduation rates. We need to improve those rates. And I think that we have a number of initiatives outlined in the plan that allow us to do that, including growing the number of undergraduate students who live with us in university housing, where we can program their living experience and create living and learning communities. All the evidence seems to suggest the longer you can hold on to your residential students, that is, keep them from moving off campus, the more likely you are to improve retention and graduation rates. And we envision making a big investment in student housing that might allow for that during the course of this strategic plan. We'll also look at other related co-curricular experiences that enrich the experience of students, keep them engaged and tied to the university, once again, in an effort to try to continue to grow those outcome measures. Speaking of outcome measures, right now in higher ed, there's virtually no outcome measure more important than the career outcome measures, the postgraduate outcome measures. We do a really good job, I believe, in career services here at Monmouth. I give Will Hill and the team a ton of credit. But if we're honest with ourselves, we must take career services to another level of excellence at this university. It is increasingly how students and their families are making decisions about their higher education. And we want to make sure that we can say to families, nobody in higher ed, nobody around us, nobody in our competitor set is going to get after helping you get into the career of your choice than we are. And that's going to require investments in career services for the jobs upon graduation, to improve outcomes in graduate schools upon graduation. We have, I think, a very acceptable acceptance rate into graduate school, but are we getting our students into the schools of their choice? We need to keep pushing that. And how about the last time we got one of our students into a prestigious postgraduate scholarship, a Fulbright or a Goldwater or a Marshall scholarship, let alone a Rhodes scholarship? I'm talking about Fulbright, Goldwater, Marshall, and others. I think we need to have a more concerted effort to take the talent that we have on this campus and to help propel them into those higher value outcomes upon graduation. So that will all be part of enhancing the student experience. Number three, we need to cultivate a more diverse, a genuinely diverse and inclusive campus environment. This means starting with making sure that we are recruiting widely here to Monmouth. That is how we recruit, where we recruit, and how we try to grow our diversity in our recruiting pool. It'll also focus on, once we're able to recruit a more diverse student population that matches more the student demographics in our recruiting market, we need to figure out how are we going to retain those students? How are we going to more fully support those students? And there's a number of initiatives in place to do just that. But the best way, we believe, the Strategic Planning Committee believes, that we can recruit and retain increasingly diverse students is to make sure that we have an increasingly diverse faculty and staff to serve them, so that they know that they're going to feel supported at this community. So we'll have to make sure that hiring practices allow for that as well. And then there'll be other ways in which we'll continue to work to support our employees here at Monmouth, not unlike continuing to work with the staff council that I created in my first year. Theme 4, we're halfway there. Stick with me. Theme 4 is all about improving our identity and our image, refreshing the ways in which we tell the Monmouth story increasingly to prospective students and their families. This is also a really important part of being successful in an increasingly competitive environment for students. We'll also, under this theme, look to leverage the great collection of assets that we already have here. The very assets that made me, in part, extremely interested to be the president of this university. A Division I athletics program, the centers that we have around the university, the Springsteen archives, a whole collection of assets that give us a chance to do what every college and university in the country wants. That is, they all want to have a spotlight shown on the great work that happens on their campus. We need to get increasingly a spotlight shown on the great work that happens on our campus. And when that happens, we'll be able to tell our story to prospective students and increase demand in the seats that we have here at Monmouth. We'll also, incidentally, try to make sure that we improve the identity and the image of our university in our very community, Monmouth County. We want to make sure that we're doing the things that make all the people of Monmouth County see Monmouth University as a great asset to their community. Theme 5, we need to continue to modernize our infrastructure. And we'll do that basically 2 ways. One is through continued investments in our first-rate campus. I mentioned student housing, for example. We need more fields here at Monmouth, not to serve our varsity athletes, although they will, but to serve the 2,500 or so undergraduate students. Can you imagine? Something like 2,500 of our 4,000 or so undergraduate students are involved in athletics of some kind: varsity athletics, club sports, intramurals, phys ed classes. We need to have more space to accommodate that growing interest in athletics and physical education on the campus, and many other enhancements that I have identified, some of which will take, I believe, this already first-rate campus and take it up even to another level. And then the second part of that will be something that maybe we learned during the pandemic, which is we need to keep making investments in our technology infrastructure. So we'll make that plainly clear in our strategic plan as well. And then finally, theme 6, despite all of what we want to do, we have to continue to ensure our financial stability during a turbulent time in higher education. We'll need to make sure that we reset some of our infrastructure to new enrollment realities. We have to make sure that we keep, there are in the industry, excuse me for interrupting myself, there are in the industry established benchmarks that identify healthy colleges and universities. They're established benchmarks in the industry. We're going to make sure that we know what those benchmarks are and do what we have to do to at least meet those benchmarks, if not exceed them. It's a lot of accounting in there, but really important measures of our financial sustainability, not just for the next 5 years, but for the next 50 years. One of the ways in which we will meet those ratios is by continuing to grow non-tuition revenue. Of course, much of this will be through the great work of our advancement team in fundraising. Yes, and I myself will be directly involved in that effort. But we'll also look at ways to generate resources from the government, ways to generate resources by renting out facilities when we are not otherwise using them. Maybe even the possibility, as is embedded in our plan, of the development on our campus of an inn and conference center. Not only would that be an incredible asset to our university and allow so much programming to happen academically, but would give us an asset that we could, of course, use to host other events, outside visitors, and generate resources that could be really beneficial to our financial situation. 6 themes taken together, in my opinion, make us both more excellent as a university and more accessible as a university in just the next 5 years. I look forward, as this makes its way around the campus, to hearing your thoughts on this. And I want to thank all of the members of the Strategic Planning Committee for their incredible work. While I have a captive audience, I'd like to recognize them by name. Mary Ann Nagy, Dr. Christopher Hirschler, Dr. Christine Hatchard, Dr. Nancy Uden, Dr. Robert Scott, students Demi Ardick and Naz Haroun, and from our administration and staff, Nina Anderson, Amanda Claus, Jennifer Lawler, Dr. Tracy Mulvaney, Dr. Zanetta Rego Kraft, and B. Rogers. My thanks to all of you for the incredible work that you have done to get the strategic plan to this point. Let me turn to my third and final piece, which is, now that we've talked about where we are managing the pandemic for the spring, talked a little bit about where we see the strategic plan leading us for the next 5 years, I'd like to just share with you some things that we're envisioning this spring that are already going to move us ahead on some of those strategic plan objectives. The strategic plan will not get formally rolled out until July 1st of 2021, but if there are some things that we can start on now, why not? And let me talk to you about a couple of those. First of all, the financial goals embedded in the strategic plan. I recognize fully that there's anxiety out in the campus community about our financial situation. You should be comforted that, relatively speaking, our university is a lot stronger than most other universities in our recruiting market. However, it's not the pandemic that worries me. Yes, we've taken steps to get through this year. We've gotten a lot of support from the federal government. Hopefully, if that money emerges from the second act, we've gotten some support from the state to help pay for our pandemic challenges. So it's not this year that worries me. It is the next year and the year after that and the year after that, as the enrollment challenges that Bob McCaig has been talking about for years start to show up in the numbers. I think I've shared with you before that we haven't had this few a number of full-time student equivalents since 2002. So as we've grown like this, you know, the demographic challenges are starting to show up in our numbers, and we're going back down a little bit. I think that's going to require us to be really smart about the ways in which we set our budgets and manage our infrastructure to serve a smaller student population. My promise to you is this: we will do everything we can at this university to try to reset our infrastructure to a new enrollment reality and be as fair to our employees as possible. I don't have details for you right now. My commitment to you is in my open meetings coming up, I will have details for you about the situation. We are in a strong position, relatively speaking. We should celebrate that. But we must make sure that with the reality of the situation confronting us, that we do what we can to live within our means and make sure that the university is sustainable, not only for the next 5 years, as I mentioned, but for the next 50. So there's a whole team of people looking at this, and my promise to you is that we'll talk about it more as the spring unfolds. Regarding fundraising, new gift discussions, major gift discussions continue. We're starting to ramp those back up, I'm pleased to say. We have redesigned our major fundraising events for 2021, which will hopefully lead to raising a ton more money for our students. In particular, the creation of the Founders Day Gala, which we'll host on October 16th this year, which will be our marquee fundraising event of the year. bringing all of our key constituents at the university together to raise money for an access fund, which we are creating so that we can make sure that our financial aid team has a pool of money available to them to aid students who need that little extra money in order to make a Monmouth education affordable. So I look forward to making that a new tradition here at Monmouth. Part of that new tradition is the creation of the President's Medal, which is basically a lifetime achievement award here at Monmouth that the board has given me permission to create. And this year, for the first time, I will be recognizing Bob Sculthorpe, former chair of our board, lifelong supporter of Monmouth, himself a product of our university, one of the biggest supporters that we have here at Monmouth. I'll be recognizing him in October with the President's Medal. Our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts continue. We have made the results of the climate study available. We'll be pouring through those. We have designed or identified a whole list of initiatives that we could implement here at the university to address the climate study and diversity and inclusion in general. The cabinet will be looking at those as recently as as soon as our next meeting in order to figure out which ones we can move on right away, even well in advance of getting our strategic plan codified. I'm pleased to share with you along those same lines that I'd like to announce today that this university will follow the lead of our state of New Jersey in making Juneteenth, that is typically June 19th, we'll make Juneteenth a holiday here at Monmouth. That is the day when the last of the slaves here in America heard the Emancipation Proclamation. And to me, that is an event worth celebrating and remembering every year here at Monmouth. And then lastly, I want to reiterate something that Reka said about a substantial gift that we've received from the Grunin Foundation, $1.5 million to create a social justice academy. That is so that K-12 teachers in the school districts in Monmouth and Ocean counties can come here to Monmouth and learn about social justice and how they might improve the operation of their classrooms. The Grunin Foundation came to us here at Monmouth, in particular our School of Education, and asked us if we would partner with them on this initiative. And I'm so proud that first, that they came to us, and secondly, that our School of Education and their collaborators around campus designed a program that I think could have real lasting impact on our community. Let me just talk for a minute about campus enhancements. Our planning continues around the build out of the Great Hall. We're slow rolling this a little bit because we're using the Great Hall for other pandemic related purposes, but we hope to continue to have our plans for the redesign of the Great Hall not only finalized, but implemented here in the spring semester. Our plans for the northwest part of the campus continues, and we'll have more to share on that as the spring progresses. We opened up, as you probably remember, in November, the new simulation lab at the Graduate Center for Nursing. We also will begin work on creating a state-of-the-art lab for occupational therapy, that new doctoral program that we just had recently approved. So work continues on investments in both academics and on our campus. And then lastly, let me just say that there will be some organizational changes throughout the course of the spring semester. You all heard or saw the news from me that two of our longtime vice presidents will be retiring at the end of this fiscal year. Patty Swanek, who has served this university faithfully for 45 years, will be retiring at the end of the year. And Marilyn McNeil, who has similarly served this university faithfully, but only for 28 years. Only 28 years Marilyn was here serving as our director of athletics. Both of them are retiring at the end of this fiscal year. We'll have plenty of opportunities in the coming weeks and months to celebrate their incredible service to this university. And I know, again, if we were gathered together, you'd be giving them the ovation that they richly deserve. I have already started a process to investigate ways in which I might either replace those individuals or cover the functions that they were responsible for. I have a process that I use to go around to the different units and to take some soundings from them. And that process continues before I make any decisions about how I might replace the irreplaceables in Marilyn and Patty. So be on the lookout for more information regarding those changes in the coming couple weeks. And then I'll add too that the search for our new permanent senior vice president and provost continues in earnest now. We met just yesterday, in fact, with the search committee, and from a pool of over 100, I think maybe 120 or something candidates, we identified 12 that we think are worthy of continuing through the process. Such a strong pool, it was almost impossible to limit it to a dozen, but we pushed the upper end of the process to ensure that we could take a look at all those good candidates. Of the 12, I'm proud to report to you that 8 of them are women and 5 of them are diverse candidates. So I'm very grateful to our search committee and to our search consultants for helping to build and identify a really diverse pool of candidates for that very important position. So again, just kicking into full gear right now, more on that soon. And then lastly, the search for the new dean of the Leon Hess School of Business continues. This is it's a little bit trailing the process of the senior vice president and provost by design. So that's just getting kicked off, but that will kick into full gear this spring semester as well. So when all is said and done, at the end of this fiscal year, there will be some continued change here at the senior administrative ranks at Monmouth. So all that being said, it promises to be an extremely busy spring. Let me just end by returning to the beginning. These are challenging times for our country and for our university community. Our ability to navigate these will require all of us to stick together. And it's important that we do so because the work that we do here at this university is so important. Let me finish by returning to John Masefield, who at the end of his address on that occasion in 1946 said this: "There are few things more enduring than a university. Religions may split into sect or heresy, dynasties may perish or be supplanted, but for century after century, the university will continue, and the stream of life will pass through it, and the thinker and the seeker will be bound together in the undying cause of bringing thought into the world. To be a member of one of these great societies must ever be a glad distinction." Well, despite the challenges that we face in our community and in our country, I am so proud to be a member of this great society that we call Monmouth University. My thanks to all of you for tuning in.